Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode, all episodes brought to you by the proud members of our founders at Patreon. Check them out today, patreon.com/SWGM podcast. We are on Twitter and the Facebooks. Go ahead and visit us there at SWGM podcast. And on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, and check the live stream. Available Tuesdays every morning after the podcast airs for the stream. If you're watching the live stream on YouTube with us right now, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring that into the show. Tonight's episode, we're talking a Kickstarter with the creator, J.C. Thompson. And let me go ahead and start to kick us off. We have Dave, the rules, Maven Scott. Say hello, Dave.
Greetings and salutations.
Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Reniston Julio Gallows, when you want to fuck up a podcast.
And our special guest, J.C. Thompson. So we're here to discuss your creation, J.C. Go ahead. Take it away. Introduce us to what's about to hit Kickstarter in October.
All right. Well, coming up in, I want to say under a month. Honestly, I could have gone a little ago, but I wanted to make sure the people at first. Setting on what I'm doing is my later pitch is urban guerrilla. So I've always been really interested in like concept of urban guerrilla warfare of the last century, where basically
Okay, I apologize. I didn't catch a lot of that. Did anybody else?
No.
Oh, boy. Okay, sorry about that. Just start off again.
Sure. Just slow down a little bit. I think maybe your mic's having a hard time keeping up with the speed.
I think you're still in the Discord green room. Go ahead and...
I'm not in Discord green room.
I see you in there.
Sorry, I mean one sec. Got this.
It's all good. This podcast is brought to you by technical difficulties.
Right. That is right.
We're still figuring it out.
Ernest and Julio Gallows, when you want to get the goblins drunk.
Close doesn't. Close doesn't.
All the way at the bottom of Discord, you just gotta click the little hang up icon.
Yep. For those of you that are wondering, you can actually become members in Patreon and gain access to the green room, where you actually see us talking about things that we're going to be talking about later on, and then deciding that we are probably not going to be able to talk about all the things we talk about.
That help?
A little bit better.
You're a bit better. Really, it's coming through just a touch robotic. So you're going to definitely want to talk slowly. It could also just be a hiccup in your internet connection too.
I think I logged you out. You should be better now.
Okay, I will slow down my speed to about this speed. Does that seem all right?
That seems better, much better.
I heard
All right.
Is with Twitchy Butcher Studios, and he's putting out Gods and Masters, which is a sort of urban fantasy setting. I've actually been working on some of the adventures, and if you check out his Kickstarter, I've written 3 adventures that are going to be one of the stretch goals, and I would really like it if everybody gets us to that stretch goal so you can read what I wrote. He'll be back in a minute to talk about it more in depth, but I tell you, it's a fun system. It kind of makes me think Skyrim a little bit. I'm only saying that because he's not on here right now. But yeah, I got that vibe. All right.
He definitely has some unique mechanics he's bringing to the table. stuff that honestly in the green room when we were talking about it, I thought that's a perfect fit for something like Titan Effect or like SWAT even might use one of the ones we were talking about there in the green room. So like there's some interesting stuff he's doing, and I mean it's full on his imagination for the world. We got a primer on some of the factions when we were looking at writing those additional adventures, and it was rather interesting to see some of that.
So one of the things that I know from working on those adventures is that you actually have 3 different factions that you can work with. One of them is necromancers, one of them is vampires, and then another one is actually like the Imperials. And players get to choose. They get to be one of the different factions and try and work from there. It's very interesting because when I was writing the adventures, I had to sort of think in terms of, okay, if it's going to go through this adventure as this faction, then it's going to have to go through an adventure as this faction, and then it's going to have to go through. So sometimes, like from the design standpoint, it had to be tailored to cope with that because it maximizes the player's choice. And each one of those different factions has a very different feel about how you can play it, because like the Imperials are definitely in a very strong structure versus the vampires, which are more secretive, and the necromancers, which they're walking around like, hey, look at us, we raised the dead. But
had almost a Warhammer-esque, like he had really wrapped them in their own individual lore, so they didn't feel like it was just, oh, and these are statistically different, but they're all really just humans. No, they actually had like a different culture that he had written for them.
Yeah.
So I guess rather than all of us sit here and continue to talk about his product while he's not here, I do want to I do just want to give a shout out to something that appeared in yesterday, I think it went public, is the second half of the interview we did on the Savage Cast for Gen Con. So if you guys haven't had a chance, I would go take a look at that, because we actually talk about some mechanics we've never publicly talked about before for Dead End. So
episode 36. Yeah, dropped yesterday. So, and that's you guys from Gen Con, right?
Yeah. Or even my little boy playing in the background at times. Like I could tell where those little snippets were taken out, but you'd have to have been there to tell. It sounds very much like just a continuous conversation, the way you guys had it edited. It's really quite good.
He's whispering.
Uh-huh. Editing. Hey, listen, I'm a big fan of editing. I'm a really big fan.
Oh.
There he is. Kind of. Here he
About
goes.
that.
There we go. We can hear him. Welcome back.
Hopefully this doesn't become a trend.
Well, this is the time to talk shit about them then. Blah 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 blah.
Hear me now.
I see him in here, but wow, that is a long drag lag behind. Holy crap! His frame just updated. Holy shit!
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a lot of lag, unfortunately.
It's coming in pretty good in Discord.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we're not using Discord.
I know. I know.
Newsflash! God damn it!
Well, we thought we had slayed all of the technical demons,
And he's gone. Oh, and he's back.
and I think, unfortunately, that what's really happening here is that that internet connection is really putting this to the ultimate test. So,
Right. Yeah. Well. All right, let's see if we can find the Kickstarter. Let's see.
I think this is a universal sign for I want to kill myself.
Yeah.
all this effort so that he can, get some publicity for his Kickstarter before it goes live. And what it's going to be known for is that it crashed the podcast.
Hey, there's no such thing as bad publicity, gentlemen.
That's right. It's good publicity.
Yeah. Guys, check out Gods and Masters. Let me even see if we can find a jump start. Like, there's this.
I was going to say, I don't think the Kickstarter page itself is live yet, Art. See, I don't think we have a link we can distribute. That won't be happening just yet, but in the days to come, that page will go live. And if you follow the Facebook, the official Facebook page, I'm sure that there'll be a link there for that Kickstarter.
Yeah, there will be very soon. I've already sent it to the licensees, but I just wanted to make sure that everything is finalized in terms of stretch goals before I make it public. I don't even want what happened.
Let's try this. If you want to try turning off your camera, maybe we can improve the connection. We'll have audio for you at least.
Yeah.
Unless your mic is your camera. Okay, we still got you. Go ahead. Try, give us a little something, voice-wise.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually a
Actually,
little
that
bit
did
better.
improve it. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent. Tell you what, I'm going to get my headphones so that way I can hear you guys all right. Give me 1 sec.
We're all sitting here staring at the screen like we're at a Guerrilla album.
I know. Like, what do I say?
The moratorium on Star Wars chat was lifted as long as I agreed not
in
to
the
sing.
green room. In the green room. It was lifted in the green room.
Again, I do not set the rules for the podcast. You have to talk to the actual host, Mr. Gunning.
Now, I will allow you a loophole, Dustin.
What's the
If
loophole?
you can somehow find out how to connect share to Star Wars, I'll allow it.
You mean like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Exactly.
I mean, that's dangerous because I'm not entirely sure, but did she or did she not perform on the holiday special?
No, she did not.
The holiday special was
not.
The holiday special was never made.
So let me ask this: Did and I don't know how many of you, I'm assuming you all got it, but did everybody get their suede box yet?
I got mine.
You sons of bitches!
Wow.
No, I actually finally have a tracking number for mine. I believe it's supposed to show up on Monday, but then again, I had added like basically everything to like the top tier. and added like extra bennies and all kinds of special stuff.
Oh.
So it's certainly qualified as a complex order.
I can tell you what I'm going to end up buying an extra set of, and that I really like is the status cards.
I have seen a couple of people post about those and ask like, are these even useful? And I'm like, oh, I think they're going to be amazingly useful to take.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna buy a second set, most definitely. And I'll probably buy a second the big action deck, just because I kind of like it. That way I can have two because I have two of the large action decks that the old one they did.
Mm-hmm.
I have two of those, but even using the new one, I know I like to use the themed decks, but I really think just using those is going to be, everybody's going to be able to see it. And I actually do have one person in my Sunday game who has vision issues. And so it'll really help her be able to see what card she has much better.
Note to self, include a large deck option when we get to the infestation deck.
Just make sure that you wear cargo pants so that you can pull out that gigantic pack of cards.
Okay,
yes.
So Leave Our Guest is back. You there, JC? And apparently I am wrong.
Well, you joined the room again.
Technical difficulties, folks.
I mean, it wouldn't be a podcast without Murphy.
Worst podcast ever.
Well, listen, it wouldn't be Savage World's GM podcast if everything went smoothly, gentlemen. I mean, come on.
Everything, if anything, went smoothly. Oh my gosh!
I mean, here's what freaks me out. If I can even nail the intro without fucking it up.
I'm just like Google Hangouts. Why did you abandon us?
I know everything was going smoothly. Everything was great.
Then the Fire Nation attacked.
And then we got fucked.
I blame ISIS.
If only we had something like a year worth of warning to have prepared for this.
Yeah, if only. I mean, who could have fucking known?
It's just like they didn't make an announcement.
Listen. I'm going to say this. Fuck that. Because they told us it was going away and then they still had it there.
Because they knew that people wouldn't
and then they really pulled the carpet out. But no, we were kidding the first time. This time for real. Like, oh, fuck you.
Yeah. We were the beta testers. Yes, we were. We were beta testing for another business.
So I'm going on a trip
to Italy.
Gonna hang out with Jobert. Gonna go to the oldest gaming store in Florence. Gonna go to a cool game store in Florence. Gonna do a role-playing event in Rome. I'm gonna go get my nerd on even in Italy while I'm on vacation. Must remember, pack my dice.
Your metal dice and putting them securely in a jock strap before you go through the TSA.
Hold your dice in your Speedo.
I'm probably going to take the metal dice out of my dice bag. I just thought about that.
You know what? If you put them in the Speedo, you can use them like a flail.
Yes. They are very sharp. They do have very sharp edges.
Oh, I bet right now I can see my
reaching a new low, but it really hasn't.
You know what? Here's what's really sick, Dave. I'm so inside your head, I could hear the Saturday Night Live, and the show has reached a new low. I could hear it in your head, but just by watching your facial expressions.
I do want to say, though, apparently the universe is on your side, Jared, because IMDb refuses to let me look up Cher's filmography.
Yep.
I think her filmography just says bad, except for Moonstruck.
Yeah, actually.
For those wondering, I just want to warn you that anyone who pays to be a patron, who actually shows up in the green room, gets exposed to things like all of us cursing madly, talking about random subjects, and Dustin occasionally singing. And this time happened to be to share.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna throw you a bone. So share. You can connect share to Nicolas Cage, Danny Aiello.
Yeah, all through Moonstruck.
Yeah, all through Moonstruck.
All right. Wait a second.
I don't know where the Star Wars connection is, but
Wait a minute. Samuel L. Jackson. All right. Samuel L. Jackson.
Jared,
Huh?
you did this.
He's got to do it in 6 degrees or less.
All right. So Moonstruck, we have Nicolas Cage.
Uh-huh.
All right. Let's see. Now I got to get to Samuel L. Jackson because I know I can get to him there. Samuel L. Jackson has been in like a million movies.
I'd say if you can't link through Samuel L. Jackson, you're playing that game wrong.
I am playing that game wrong.
Yeah, wait. You're not supposed to be able to use you're just supposed to come up with it out the top of your head, not using the internet.
Amos and
Right.
Andrew.
Kind of cheating.
Yeah, you're kind of cheating.
Wait, Amos and Andrew. Samuel L. Jackson was in and Nicolas Cage were in Amos and Andrew together.
You bet.
That
And our
doesn't
guest
count.
has returned and saved us from Dustin.
That doesn't count, Dustin, because you didn't come up with it. Sorry.
All right, so I seem to be conking out every like 3 to 5 minutes. So what I figure is just I'll try to answer questions as quick as possible. I've got the link to the chat pulled up, so when I inevitably log out, I'll just click it in and hopefully only be like a few seconds in between. All right, rapid fire. I'll start us out. Okay, Gods and Masters is what I call an urban guerrilla fantasy game. Basically, I've been really fascinated with the concept of guerrilla warfare in the last century or so, usually in, like the third world, where countries with giant armies will just basically show up to a region that they can't possibly hope to understand and just think, you know what, we got this. We'll just, be in charge and, we'll be home by Christmas and all that sort of thing. And then they just get fucking wrecked. And that is essentially the drama that is unfolding in this game. There's basically 3 factions that are all playable, and you could go outside the faction system, but it's really designed for that. So you have what is called the Gronman Empire. They are basically this sort of enlightened imperial state that is trying to bring the world out of the Dark Age. But they're doing this by basically assimilating every culture that they come across and not giving anyone a choice in the matter. That being said, they are probably the best option as far as the nation states in this part of the world. But a lot of people really aren't interested for various reasons. You have the local people. They have formed something called a shadow army. They've been under imperial rule for like 5 years. And basically, it's a hair's breadth from insurrection. They're not fighting in an organized military anymore. They gave that up after their first real defeat. So instead, they're doing everything they can to destroy the empire by like 10,000 pinpricks. And then for the third faction, you have a basically human supremacist vampiric cult that is using the instability here to really nest in where they can't do that anywhere else because basically the Empire would hunt them down. But because of all the civil unrest here, because the Empire already has its hands full with the Shadow Warriors, they have basically been dug in, and they're using the chaos to fuel their black magic. And hopefully the plan is to bring back their dark god. All that come through? All right, solid. Yeah, so that's not really an elevator pitch, but that is essentially what the game is. Well, I mean, I've been gosh, this seems embarrassing to say. I've been writing this in its current form since my senior year of college. I'm 29 now, so it's been the better part of a decade. Originally, my original inquiry to Pinnacle, I had this entire world scoped out, and I was ready to press the send button, but then I realized that I had kind of stretched myself a little too thin. I had Savage Tales that were going on all across like the northern half of a continent, and basically no coherent way to link them. So I decided what I needed to do was take what I thought was like the archetypal struggle from the setting, like my best piece, my best settlement, and basically focus in, narrow everything down to there. And I didn't forget that other lore that I wrote. It's just not front and center, but the details are still there. This also means that supposing this product is successful, I have more than enough material to expand in a couple of different directions. But that's a long shot, I'm happy to admit. I'll tell you what it was. I took a military history class, and I had to do a term project, and I ended up reading a book called Total Resistance, if you've ever heard of it. It's a Swiss book written by like some army officer back in the Cold War era. And basically during that time, the Swiss were worried that the Soviet bloc was going to try to conquer them at any time. So this guy basically wrote a manual explaining not to the army how to resist, but how civilians should resist. It has sections like, if you're a school teacher, this is what you do to fight the commies. If you are a gas station attendant, this is what you do. So I basically got this idea in my head. What happens if a culture that is really not militaristic, because that implies a certain amount of structure and overarching authority, but just like a bunch of sort of anarchistic, bloodthirsty raiders? What happens if they get assimilated like this? They're not going to take it lying down, and they're probably not going to organize like an army. So what would they do to just totally wreck whatever army was trying to conquer them? The other thing that kind of played into that is also in that same class, I was reading about the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, like in the year 9, where 3 legions just went up to Germany and just fucking disappeared into the forest. And so that's kind of, it was somewhere in between those that Gods and Masters first emerged. Well, we were talking about dramatic stealth before the show started, so that one, I'm happy to go into again. Basically, I wanted a sort of system where you could go kind of Metal Gear and just be sneaking around behind guards and sentries, finding ways to just run up and stab them or shoot them under the cover of darkness. So I call that the dramatic stealth system, and it's really not that complicated of a rule addition. I designed it specifically so that it could be an extra layer on top of combat without making anything too overly complicated. And in the test runs, it's gone pretty smoothly so far. So I'm quite happy with that. Mm-hmm. There's one that's not, well, I guess it's kind of a heist. It's more of a prison rescue, and also the prisoner is located pretty close to some valuable shit that you could also steal if you feel so inclined. So there are definitely some infiltration missions based around that. And it was very important to me when I was making this setting that I make some mechanics that would be useful to people who have absolutely no interest in my product. Partly because, I want to increase my commercial appeal. I mean, it is a business, let's be real. But also because I want to offer something to the Savage community that's not just, stacks of lore and stat blocks that they're not going to use.
Especially lately, which is what exactly does your setting bring to the table that hasn't been done before? And I mean, the obvious answer, you know, for any setting is going to be what lore, what characters, what kind of a story twist do you bring to the game. But I think it's really interesting the number of savages you talk to who own nearly every setting, that have bought everything from every ace, that have bought everything that Peg's put out, and then harvest mechanics out of those to use in their own home games. So I think making sure your book has some additional mechanics in it like that makes a lot of sense. How are you as far as like edges and hindrances? Are you focusing more on additional mechanics, or are you focusing also on some of these ways to specialize the character?
Anything else I've seen. I'm not one of those savages that has every single book, so there could be something I've missed, but I'm pretty sure no one has done this way. Okay, so the first couple chapters of the book are basic character creation for everybody, but I say straight up before you get into the actual stat creation that your team, not just your character, that won't work at all. Your team needs to pick a faction to play with, and that changes the gameplay experience significantly. So you get a few different edges. You get a couple. I tried to include at least one unique hindrance for every faction, and you also get a bunch of gear changes, and then what I call advantages and disadvantages, which are basically edges and hindrances, except they apply for everyone in that faction. So, for example, with the Imperial faction, you guys have the force of the law on your side, which means you can, march around in broad daylight with weapons and armor and not have to worry about anyone, trying to arrest you. But on the other hand, there are things like public contempt. Basically, people just aren't going to talk to you unless they feel they have no other choice but to do so. If you order food in a restaurant, there's a good chance that it's going to taste a little funny. People leave out key details when you're interviewing witnesses to crime scenes, things like that. And every faction has something like that. The cultists have basically a ludicrous amount of black magic. Their arcane background is definitely more powerful than the other unique arcane backgrounds, but it comes at a great cost. There's basically no way to escape being a serial killer if you embrace it fully. So I would say as far as regular gameplay edges, there are definitely a few. I've seen settings with a lot more, but the arcane backgrounds I focused a lot on, and at least one of them would be applicable to any dark fantasy setting, that being arcane background occult. Okay, so they are essentially a giant. I kind of like both sides of vampire lore. I'm not considering Twilight to be one of those sides, of course, but I like the old-fashioned vampires where, if you read the original Dracula was not what we would consider to be a vampire today. He could walk around in the daytime. He didn't have any of his powers at that time. But, he could still function in society like a person, more or less. It's just that he had to, drink blood from time to time in order to keep all of his abilities. So what I did is I created a sort of supernatural disease called the corruption. The corruption has basically two stages. The first one is that traditional, Dracula-style vampire. And then the second one is more of the, if you're familiar with the Buffyverse, you touch sunlight and you basically burst into flames. So with the corruption, you have access to a few of the corrupted edges, but not nearly as many. Let's see, you get the normal undead stuff, your +2 to toughness, +2 to recover from being shaken, all that stuff. However, if you walk into direct sunlight, you lose all of your abilities and you get a level of fatigue. You need to drink blood. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's once every couple of weeks. I've changed that enough in the play testing that I can't remember what the exact figure is anymore. But you don't need to drink blood that often. And you can live your life. People aren't going to notice that you're necessarily a vampiric creature right away. However, if you die when you have the corruption, unless you're maimed in the head or your heart is removed. Basically the typical vampiric weaknesses. It takes a few days, but your corpse kind of realigns itself and you progress to the next stage of the disease, which is full-on vampirism. And with full-on vampirism, you have a lot more edges, but you also have a lot more hindrances. You're definitely recognizable as what you are pretty much at first glance. And that's the one where if you walk into sunlight, you have to worry about catching on fire pretty much immediately. So at the top of the cult, you have the proper vampires, and the Angels of Death are the basically the big bads that stand just behind the prophet himself. They have advanced to an even further stage that so far none of the other members have advanced to. So then under them you have the proper vampires, under them you have the corrupted, and then under them you have human wannabes, and then at the very lowest level you have their thralls. The way I do thralls is not with some sort of psychic or magical manipulation. It's basically just if you can capture someone and bring them back to your temple, they are enslaved and considered to be property. They're also human supremacists, so most of their thralls are not human, and the ones that aren't human are treated like shit. Yeah, more or less. In fact, a couple of the savage tales that I included centered around them are rescuing people who are kidnapped. There's one where you basically take on one of the temples and it becomes a full-on battle. I would say that none of my factions are necessarily good, but that one is pretty clearly evil. That being said, they do kind of have a point about how humans are not really given the same respect as the other races in society. So they're not coming completely out of nowhere. It's just that they've been consumed by revenge instead of, trying to make positive changes.
Right. That sounds pretty awesome. Before, when we were having technical difficulties, I was telling the users that I had actually wrote 3 adventures for you, and it's one of the stretch goals on the Kickstarter. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter and some of those stretch goals?
Yeah. Okay. So my current funding level has not been finalized yet, so I don't want to get.
Oh, you don't have to give us numbers.
I just phased out again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So the basic book is going to be right in front of me. Currently about 250 pages, all said and done. It is very important to me to release one book. I don't like making people have to buy a player's guide and a game master's guide and all of that stuff. So it's going to be a little bit on the large side, but everything that you need will be in there. It's going to be full color. It's going to be PDF and print on demand only at this point for a number of reasons. The first bit being that it's my first project and I don't want to go bankrupt. And I know that that causes people to do that. So I'd rather leave the distribution to people who know what they're doing, and I can worry about creating a quality product.
By no means do any of us understand exactly what you're talking about.
So there's that. Let's see. If you pledge $10 or more, you get access to the beta. Like, I'm going to send out an update on the first day that the Kickstarter is live, and from then on, the player's guide section will be, ready to download. I can't guarantee that everything is going to be completely finalized. You know how when Suede was getting passed around, it went through God knows how many iterations. So it's probably going to be that for a month or so, but it will be very playable right out of the gate. I don't want people to back my product and then get it in the mail a couple months later and be kind of disappointed with what they got. So if you read it and you find out that it's not for you, hey, I understand. So yeah, I want to make that available to everyone. As far as stretch goals, pretty much all I have at this point is adventures by various people. Dustin's is the very first one. He's got 3, one with each of the factions. There is Aaron Lamprou. Let's see, we got Charles White on board. We got a couple other people to do a character sheet with Thomas Shook, who's one of the ones who did Suede layout as well. He's a very competent guy. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's very helpful in the process so far. I'm a big fan of his work. So that I'm thinking about doing some pre-generated characters, but I've got very mixed feedback on that. There's some people who insist that it's absolutely, and there are other people who say, no, I hate pre-generated characters. I never use them. So
we've had a little run-in with like pre-generated characters ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we have one of our products that we've learned from, and shout out to the Savage Cast. Dave talked about it last time around. We had the Atomic Ninja archetypes. So we're going to be, I don't know, Dave, if we've talked about it on this podcast, but that's going to get an update. But right now we're like super down in dead end. But I understand like this whole issue. I'll give you this much. Make sure you flesh out the backstory for the characters, because people really do want a backstory for each character.
Yeah, fair enough. I do have, I believe it's 7 pre-gens that, again, are already free to play. It's my Jumpstart, which is on drive-through. Pay what you want. Don't feel obligated to pay anything. And the Imperial characters that I created there are viable for at least 6 of the Savage Tales that I have.
And that Jumpstart's available right now, so people who are listening could actually go out and pick that up from drive-through right now and actually get their hands on at least a piece of this setting before the Kickstarter even goes live.
Yeah, right. And if it came out with the suede bundles, didn't it?
Yeah, it was, I think, the last one.
Yeah, so part 3. So if you guys are really interested and you're listening to the podcast, check through your folder. I mean, look for Gods and Masters. You'll be able to find this Jumpstart.
Well, that, or again, hit drive-through if you're among the droves of people who didn't get a chance to pick up Suede during the Kickstarter. Yeah. That's one of those things that it really kind of came home very quickly, was that not everyone actually had the funds available at the time, or the ability to get out there and back the Suede Kickstarter. So it's great that a lot of the Savages have gone the extra mile to make sure that those Jumpstarts are available for free, or pay what you want on Drive-Thru RPG. I guess my question to you, to kind of keep this rolling right along, is obviously you're doing kind of a dark fantasy, but initially you had also described it as kind of this guerrilla aspect of it. And I know you talked about like what inspired you to do this guerrilla aspect of it, but how deeply do the players actually interact with the guerrilla warfare aspect of this setting? Is that something that you want to make very front and center of the plot point? Is it something that the GMs are expected to make front and center of their campaigns? Or is that kind of, it's a theme, but you only have to use it if you want?
How would I say this? Basically, it depends on what faction you're playing for. If you're playing for the Imperial characters, you're not going to be conducting much guerrilla warfare, but you're going to be on the receiving end of it on a fairly regular basis. You're going to be subject to ambushes, surprise attacks. People are going to try to kidnap your loved ones, things like that. Basically no tactic is off the table, no matter how dirty it is. If you are the Shadow Army, that's basically the only way that they can plausibly wage war against the people they see as oppressors. They're not going to win in open fighting, and most of the edges and special gear that I gave them is very conducive to attacking from the shadows. It's not to say that they never win any straight-up fights. It's just that if you have a straight-up fight, you've already failed in your first objective of not being noticed. As far as the theme in terms of gear, I tried to base a lot of my gear on modern weapons that are used in guerrilla warfare and kind of work my way backwards into like fantasy levels of technology. For example, the Shadow Army faction has an attachment that they can get on their crossbows, where basically it's a crossbow bolt with a sort of grapefruit-sized shell on the very front of it, and the idea is that you're supposed to load a potion into it and basically activate it remotely. So essentially I was creating a grenade launcher, but if you use other types of potions, you can get other tactical applications. There's one that makes a wall when it hits the ground. It just causes rock to rise up out of the ground. So one of my more creative playtesters actually did that. He basically had a shootable rock barrier that he could load into the front of his crossbow, things like that.
Is that using the artifice rules from Suede, so that my character can put put together these potions based on the powers I've taken.
Kinds of effect you need, but in the next month or so, I'm open to revisiting that. Now that I've played it a little bit more, it could go either way at this point, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Okay, and then we've got another question here from a viewer. Art's wanting to know how often or how prevalent is fear in the way this is set up, and do you use the fear table quite a bit, or is that something that just really doesn't show up in this? Because it sounds like you're kind of walking this fine line between something that could absolutely be centered around the terror of an unknown enemy, but you also seem to be relying fairly heavily on things like your dramatic stealth and whatnot to handle those moments rather than just a straight like fear mechanic.
So most of the time when fear comes up, it comes in the form of the arcane backgrounds. So the Imperials have light magic, which is pretty straightforward. It actually works the way light magic did back in the last edition of Savage Worlds with sinning and whatnot. I actually had to write to Pinnacle to make sure that they were okay with me using that mechanic that is no longer in the book. I just like how it works, to be perfectly honest. I think that they made the current Miracles arcane background a little too vague in terms of what you can and can't do. But the other two, I'm digressing, sorry. The other two arcane backgrounds have a fair bit of supernatural horror in there. So the Shadow Warriors basically have a spiritual tradition of necromancy in their communities. They don't really believe in gods the way that other cultures do. They believe that if you live a good life and that if you're a ferocious warrior, that you go down into the crypts under the city to sleep. And if your people are ever in danger, then it's the responsibility of necromancers in later generations to wake you up. So they focus pretty hard on the raising the dead side of things. And yeah, there are times where players in other factions are just jumped with skeletons, zombies. There's one particular gang of rogue necromancers called the Circle of Bones, who are basically creating an army of zombified Imperial soldiers. The idea being that they're wearing the uniforms at nighttime, they can just sneak right up on you, and you think, "Oh yeah, it's the Imperials. No, they're here to help." And then all of a sudden, you realize that they're, eating your face.
They're not there to help.
Right.
They're there to help themselves to your meat parts.
Mm-hmm. And then the arcane background occult is very focused on blood sacrifice. The way that you have to maintain your powers is kind of the reverse of sinning. So the gods of shadow don't actually give a shit if you sin or not. Like, what does that even mean to eternal entities? Sinning is just this paltry mortal concept. What you have to do is you have to make commitments to them in the forms of sacrifices. So there are minor sacrifices, there are moderate sacrifices, and there are major sacrifices. The moderate ones are every week. The minor are every week. The moderate are every fortnight, and the major are every month. The minor are just, honestly, just kind of time commitments. The gods of shadow are not absolutely evil, but they are ambiguous. So basically, they'll embody two different aspects of something. So instead of the god of death, it's the god of life and death. It's the god of creation and destruction. It's the god of pleasure and pain, things like that. So the minor sacrifices are things that are honestly pretty harmless. Like there's one who just requires you to spend so much time reading books and increasing your knowledge every week. By the time they get to moderate, they're becoming a little more severe. With minor sacrifices, if you don't do them, you lose your powers. With moderate sacrifices, it's a -2. But when you get into major sacrifices, they're asking for major commitments. You need to kill people. There are certain sacrificial rites that you need to fix. And if you don't, you're going to be suffering a major penalty to your power usage. There is one particular edge that I quite like called Embrace the Darkness, where basically it straight up doubles your power points. But every single god that you have pledged to at this point requires all their sacrifices to be weekly from here on out.
Right.
So basically, you're going to be killing people on a nightly or at least semi-nightly basis in order to feed your gods.
That is insane. That's that. Just the sheer volume. You'd have to be like full on Jack the Ripper for that.
Yeah, basically. I had a player character in one of the playtests who did this, and it totally changed his motives as a player. Before then, it was, how can we serve the church? How can we increase our holdings and become more powerful? And after that, it was just like, okay, I need to pencil in a ritual sacrifice tomorrow before 9 o'clock, or else I'm going to lose the use of my powers. So every single decision he made was, how can I get more captives? How can I grab more people to sacrifice to our masters?
Yeah, it was like, let's schedule a massage.
So it's the Sweeney Todd of folks in your setting. Just keep killing them all.
Into their basically take the legendary. People with arcane background occult can become significantly more powerful than any of the other arcane backgrounds. You have to pay for it. It's not free. It is a fair exchange. And of course, when there's an imperial army enforcing martial law in the city, how discreetly are you going to be able to, make this many people disappear? It's only a matter of time before you come to blows with people who might not be able to overpower you individually, but can definitely outgun you in sheer force of numbers.
Right.
Now, technologically, kind of a timeline, what would you say the basics of your setting are? I know you had initially kind of said during one of the moments where we were having some technical difficulties that one of the rules of it was, when it comes to guns, just don't use guns. But, where do you want this to fall? What can people expect as far as like a technology level or kind of an era of play?
Firearms whatsoever. When I was talking about not using guns, I was talking about in the dramatic stealth rules. I do have one aside for gunplay in those rules, just because I want that to be something that is more accessible to non-gods and masters players. But as far as technology in the game, it's basically, imagine if gunpowder was never invented in the beginning of the Renaissance, and so crossbow technology started getting significantly more sophisticated. You have repeaters. You have one weapon that comes up in a Savage Tale called a siege crossbow, which is very heavy, but it shoots out like 10 or 20 small darts in kind of a cone shape. It basically shoots them out in a fan. You have ballista that are kind of ancient Roman style. Familiar with Roman artillery. The stuff was actually pretty sophisticated. So imagine if the Roman Empire never fell, or if gunpowder was never invented in the Renaissance. So it's classical technology, but taken to the nth degree.
I was going to say, so you've got kind of a 15 minutes into the future-esque version of classic fantasy then, where you take those typical fantasy tropes as far as gear and technology and kind of cast them to kind of the most robust version.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me that in so many fantasy games and movies and stories and all that stuff, that people have been basically trapped in the Middle Ages for God knows how long, and it seems that their technology has not increased at all. I will fully accept that no one has discovered gunpowder, because, the way gunpowder was discovered in the real world, it was honestly just kind of a fluke, right? Yeah, I'll give you that, but technology is still going to increase. Architecture and engineering are going to get kind of crazy. There is a Savage Tale for the Imperial faction where you have to go into basically a floating fortress. They've essentially taken a couple of galley ships, stuck them together, and put a siege tower on top.
Nice.
And basically, it's just a floating artillery platform.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of thing is kind of what the feel I'm going for.
So how do you handle siege warfare?
It hasn't come to that in this particular city. After the first big massacre, everyone threw the gates open and just let the Imperials march in.
Yeah, because they're shooting you with cannons and you have crossbows.
Well, and to a certain extent, it seems like the themes here are less, army versus army, and more
army versus terrorists.
Pockets of resistance that show up, and you might have a small squad up to even a large gathering of people is still not quite to the point of being a fully fledged army.
Yep. I kind of get into a little bit the way that the people in this city waged war before they were conquered. So they had more or less a stateless community, but the way they were able to pull that off without just devolving into infighting with each other is basically they spent all their time preying on the people in the lowlands. Or sorry, in the flatlands, as they call them. If you're a flatlander, you're basically not a person. If you're one of the mountain people, then they are nothing but honorable to you. But if you are not kind of from their culture and their community, they just don't really see you as, anything worthwhile. So the way they would wage war is kind of somewhere between like the Vikings and the Iroquois. Like 10 of them would form a war band, travel through the forest, show up in your backyard, murder you, murder your family, burn your house down, travel 20 miles through the forest and do it again. Rinse, repeat, steal all your shit. And that's essentially how they would fight. You wouldn't see giant war bands coming together and, attacking cities. You would just see them burning and reaving the countryside. And that's kind of the tactical approach that they've taken with fighting the Imperials as well.
And Dustin, all those conversations of Imperials, does it have your skin crawling?
Skyrim is for the Nords. So you actually did create a couple of new races, like the Anir?
Yep. Sorry,
go ahead.
Well, first off, I don't think that I could do elves and dwarves and all that stuff any better than they've already been done by hundreds of people that came before me. But I also kind of wanted to take some of the strange assumptions from like Tolkien's Middle Earth that no one really ever goes into. Like if you have a divine race that creates one group of people and gives them basically immortality and just gives everyone else, a very finite lifespan, is everyone else supposed to be okay with that?
It's funny that you bring that up, because the first thing I thought is, how is it that you're 500 years old and still have the average intelligence of a 30-year-old man?
Well, your brain can only hold that much. And let's be perfectly honest. If humans could live for 500 years, sure, there would be a lot of people who could accomplish great things. They could master the arts and sciences, but there would probably also be a lot of people who just watch TV for 400 years.
This is true.
Yeah, so actually the fact that the Anir have all these elemental immunities, they have natural weapons, they have a venomous sting, which they can use to great effect on humans. And they outlive humans by, several times. It's created kind of this inequality in practice, if not in law. So the Grandman Emperor is Anir himself, and he believes in giving humans, the full legal treatment, the same as Anir. However, his wife is in charge of hiring for the imperial bureaucracy. She's at the head. And if a space opens in the imperial bureaucracy, she has a choice. She can hire a human who might give her 30 or 40 years of service, or she can hire an Anir who can, do the same thing for 300 or 400 years. It's not really a hard choice to make. So, a lot of humans are feeling dissatisfied with the way of things just because of, the natural inequality that has always existed.
I think it's kind of interesting because in a lot of these settings, like a particular one that involves space wizards and laser swords, it seems to be more human-centric. Like the human race is the one that's like sort of dominating everybody. But this is sort of, it sounds like reverse. Like there's a sort of clerical reason as to why the humans aren't the dominant species.
Yeah, and they're not going to take that laying down. The big reason that the vampiric cult has been successful is because vampirism basically corrects all the things that people see as problems with the human condition. It gives you the long life. It gives you the immunities. It gives you the claws and the bite. It gives you all these things that humans had long ago thought, we're never going to have that. We're just going to be the subservient race for forever.
That sounds pretty interesting, man. That sounds fun.
Awesome. We're closing in on the hour of live broadcast. So, any final thoughts? Any final things you want to share, real quick, JC?
I guess I could talk about the way I do Savage Tales real fast. That's all right. Okay, so I know probably a lot of people are wondering, if I'm doing a plot point campaign. And the way the faction format works, plot point campaign is not really viable. What I have currently are 10 Savage Tales that escalate, so one for novice, one for seasoned, one for veteran. And instead of being Savage Tales geared for a specific faction, they're geared against a specific faction. So one of the factions will be causing some shenanigans or up to trouble, and then both other factions have plot hooks to get them involved, and then the way they resolve them is left to, their own specific ideology, their gear, their equipment, and all that stuff. So if you play the same Savage Tale twice with each different faction, you can get a radically different approach and result. That also means that they have to be fairly open-ended. I would say that they're a bit on the long side as far as Savage Tales are concerned. Not that that's a bad thing. It just gives you a lot more to play with.
Sounds actually really cool.
But what I have is, in terms of a plot point replacement, if the initial book is successful, this is the next thing that would be in the works, is essentially 3 mini plot point campaigns. One for where each of the factions is the bad guys, where each Savage Tale bleeds right into the other one. Basically, some of the more powerful players within the city are getting up to something a little more extreme than you normally see, and you have to figure out what's going on and stop it. And the thing about those is they could be shuffled around if you want. If you want to play one and then the other, that would be a-okay. If you want to, mix them up together and have your characters trying to fight off both sides at the same time, that would also be totally viable. So that's what I have in the works for that.
Cool.
Ooh, now here's a great last-minute question from one of the listeners. Art's asking, what happens when you have players who want to play different factions in the same group? So, one guy who's wanting to play an Imperial while another is wanting to play a Vampire.
Well, I mean, that would turn into a fight to the death in the very first scenario. What I would suggest doing, and what I've done in a couple of the play tests, is make up 2 different characters and go, one session and then the other. And one of the fun things you can do if you've been running this for a little while is you can have them run into the aftermath of what their last character did.
Yeah.
If one character, destroyed say an Imperial outpost or something like that, and then you switch to the Imperial characters the next week, then you're left to clean up the mess. And if you really want to have some fun with that, you could even have characters face off against each other and see which direction you want to go in.
I don't know if I'd recommend doing that, because then you have this whole 50-50 split where players are fighting themselves.
Well, I think I wouldn't recommend doing that often, but if you wanted that to be like the final episode of a campaign, if you know that you're not going to be playing anything after that, that could be a fun finale to end on.
It's an idea. That's definitely an idea.
But then the true straightforward answer here is that there is no inter-faction play. Like, there's no reason within the continuity of the world where, a member of the Necromancers, a member of the Vampires, and a member of the Imperium would be working together on something.
I mean, if you went to Iraq, would you see American soldiers shaking hands and having some drinks and expressing some quippy dialogue with ISIS? These people are at each other's throats. They're not going to be making temporary alliances to fight the bigger bad or anything like that. No, these people are militarily, ideologically, and philosophically opposed in pretty much every level.
Cool. All right. Anything else in the live chat we want to discuss real quick? Oh, there's Art. Trying to get another one in under the wire. Well, okay. So we'll let Art get one more in under the wire. How do you suggest handling players who want to play? Oh no, he already talked about it. Never mind.
I was gonna say that's one we just did.
Yeah.
So I think we've cleaned out the live user questions. So JC, is there anything about the setting that you feel like you haven't got a chance to talk about tonight that is
magic?
That is the reason why people should be looking for this setting, though.
Elemental magic. The way I do magic is totally different from the generic power modifiers that they use in Suede. I do like that system, and I understand that in certain settings that is definitely the best way to go, but I didn't care for it in mine because I want every single element to have kind of its own thing. So what I did for that is I said, the generic modifiers in the front part of the magic chapter, you don't get those. You can still get the individual power modifiers, like if you want to get greater healing, go for it. But instead of that, every element gets a few of its own. Some of them have a cost, and you can turn them on and off, and others are free, and they are constantly in effect. those usually have an upside and a downside. The example that I could give you off the top of my head is the one lightning magic. So I would say that lightning is simultaneously the most powerful and also the hardest to use. So first off, actually all of their power modifiers are free for the lightning style. It ignores armor, metal armor to be specific, straight up. That's unambiguous bonus. But it is also half the range of all the other magic types because it's always arcing off towards the ground and it's difficult to control. If a character is carrying a certain amount of metal, or if they're in water, you add an extra d6 to damage. But on the downside, if you roll a 1 or a 2, kind of like the shotgun rules in Deadlands, if there's an adjacent character, your power arcs off into that. And that applies to both helpful and harmful powers. So if you're trying to apply healing to your character, to your ally who's in the middle of melee, and you roll a 1 or a 2, that healing power is going to arc off into the enemy who might also be hurting. And likewise, if you're trying to hit somebody with a lightning bolt, then it's going to arc off into your friend the same way. So it's difficult to control, but it also has a pretty high power yield compared to some of the other types.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah, and there are 7 elements. Let's see if I can rattle them off. Let's see. We have earth, acid, water, ice, air, lightning, and fire.
Cool.
And when are you thinking people will be able to see the Kickstarter? Do you have a kind of a projected launch date?
I'd like to do it in October. I don't want to hammer an exact date just in case something changes. But as I said, I could have gone to Kickstarter last month. I just wanted people to know about the game first before I put myself out there. If it doesn't happen by, I'd say October 10th, I would be very surprised. And I also have a guest author who's writing something for publication before the Kickstarter is over. You guys know Tim Early? Or Early?
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Yeah, the guy behind The Holler.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's writing something that focuses on the vampiric cult, and we're hoping to have that out around Halloween. So that way it'll give people a little something to play. And it will be usable with the Imperial characters in my Jumpstart, so you won't have to do anything. You can just print out the free Jumpstart, and this one will be released for not very much. Yeah, I haven't worked out the price yet or anything, but it should also be fairly accessible. And yeah, you could easily run that while you're waiting on everything to get finished up.
Cool deal.
All right. Well, that's all. Until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dave, Chris, Dustin, and our host, our special guest. Check out God Monsters.
Masters,
sorry.
not you too.
Masters when it goes live on Kickstarter in October. Until next time, keep rolling,